Daniel Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the panel on the old communications array. The alien sun burned high in the sky, casting a reddish glow over the rocky terrain. He had been sent to Velara 7, a remote world where a small human research colony had been established. His job was simple: repair the damaged systems and ensure smooth communication with Earth. But today, something felt different. The air was still, too quiet. The usual distant chirps of the local wildlife were gone. A strange feeling of being watched crept up his spine. He turned slowly, scanning the vast open landscape. At first, he saw nothing but the tall, spindly trees swaying in the dry breeze. But then, movement. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, stepping onto the dusty ground. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, an alien. She was tall, elegant yet fragile-looking, her violet skin shimmering under the alien sun. Silver eyes, wide and filled with fear, locked onto him. She wore a long, tattered cloak, and her bare feet left small prints in the dust as she moved. Before Daniel could react, she suddenly rushed toward him. "Hey, wait." She threw herself into his arms, her whole body trembling. Daniel froze, too shocked to move. Her grip was desperate, like she was holding on to him for dear life. And then, she started weeping. Soft, heartbreaking sobs shook her shoulders. Daniel, still standing stiff as a board, looked down at her. He had seen many strange things in his career, but an alien woman clinging to him, crying, was not one of them. Are you okay?" he asked awkwardly. She didn't answer, only tightening her grip. Daniel hesitated, then gently placed his hands on her arms, trying to calm her down. Hey, it's all right. What happened?" She lifted her head, her silver eyes shimmering with tears. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Please, help me," she whispered. Her voice was soft, shaky, and accented. Daniel's brows furrowed. This wasn't normal. He had seen Valerians before, traders, diplomats, but never like this. They were usually proud, composed, almost distant. But this woman, she was terrified. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She took a shaky breath. "Ceres." "Ceres," he repeated. "All right. Ceres, what happened? Why are you out here alone?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back slightly and hesitantly lifted her sleeve, revealing her forearm. Daniel's eyes widened. There was a glowing mark on her skin, faintly pulsing with an eerie golden light. "What is that?" he asked, feeling a sudden unease. Ceres swallowed hard. You did this." Daniel stared at her. His brain struggled to process her words. "Me," he repeated. "No, that's not possible." Ceres nodded. "You marked me. And now, they will come." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Who was coming? Why did she think he marked her? Something was very, very wrong. And whatever was happening, he was now part of it. Daniel stared at the glowing mark on Ceres' arm, his mind racing. The golden light pulsed faintly, as if alive, as if watching him. You think I did this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Ceres nodded, clutching her arm. Her breathing was still uneven, her body still trembling. Daniel shook his head. "No, that's not possible. I don't even know what that is." Ceres stared at him, her silver eyes full of something Daniel couldn't quite place. Desperation, confusion, maybe even hope. "You don't remember," she whispered. It wasn't a question. Daniel frowned. "Remember what?" Ceres looked away, her hands tightening into fists. She took a slow breath, as if trying to find the right words. "This mark, it is a bond," she finally said. "A life debt. It appeared when I saw you." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Life debt? That sounded serious." "I don't understand," he said. "I've never met you before today." Ceres looked back at him, and for a moment There was sadness in her eyes. "You saved me," she whispered. "A long time ago." Daniel blinked. He had been in many places, on many missions. As an engineer working for the United Earth Colonies, he had been assigned to multiple planets. He had seen disasters, wars, and tragedies. He had helped people, human and alien alike. But he had no memory of saving her. "When?" he asked. Cirrus hesitated. "Many cycles ago, when I was a child." Daniel's mind reeled. If she was talking about Valerian cycles, then that could mean anywhere from 10 to 15 years ago. He tried to think back. Had he ever been to her world? Then suddenly, a faint memory surfaced. A war-torn planet, smoke rising from burning cities, an evacuation mission. Daniel had been part of a UEC relief team that assisted in evacuating civilians from a Valerian colony under attack by an unknown force. He had repaired broken ships, helped transport injured refugees. It was a chaotic, desperate time. Had she been there? Cirrus stepped closer. "The moment I saw you, the mark appeared. It means my life is now yours." Daniel felt a chill. "What does that mean?" Cirrus lowered her gaze. "It means, I belong to you now." Daniel took a step back. "No, that's not right. That's not how humans do things." Cirrus' hands tightened around her cloak. "But it is how my people do things." Daniel exhaled sharply. "That's ridiculous. You're not a possession. You're a person." Cirrus flinched slightly at his words. "That does not matter. The bond has already formed. If you do not accept it, I will be seen as abandoned." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Abandoned." Cirrus hesitated, then said softly, "and hunted." A cold silence stretched between them. Daniel's fists clenched. "You mean they'll kill you if I don't accept this life debt?" Cirrus nodded, her expression unreadable. "It is the law of my people. A bond that is rejected is a bond that is broken. And those who are unclaimed are seen as dishonored." Daniel's anger flared. "That's insane." Cirrus swallowed. "It is our way." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the situation. This wasn't just some superstition. This was a real deadly consequence. "Who will come for you?" he asked. Cirrus's voice dropped to a whisper. "The enforcers." Daniel didn't like the sound of that. "They are warriors," she explained. "They ensure that all bonds are honored. If a mark is rejected, they hunt the marked one. They will find me." Daniel took a deep breath. His instinct screamed that this wasn't his problem, that he should walk away. But the look in Cirrus' eyes stopped him. She was terrified, and Daniel had never been the kind of man to turn his back on someone in need. He sighed. "All right, we need to figure this out. You're not dying today." Cirrus stared at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. For the first time since she had clung to him, she looked slightly less afraid. But deep inside, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Daniel sat in his small living quarters, staring at Cirrus as she sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The glow of the life bond mark on her arm had faded slightly, but it still pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder of the situation they were in. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So let me get this straight. If I don't accept this bond, your people will send warriors, enforcers, to hunt you down." Cirrus nodded slowly, her silver eyes filled with something between fear and resignation. Daniel rubbed his face. "That's insane. Can't you just tell them you don't want to follow this tradition?" She shook her head. "No, it is not my choice. The moment the bond appeared, my fate was sealed. If I try to deny it, I will be marked as a traitor." Daniel let out a frustrated sigh. "All right, then tell me this. How do we break the bond?" Cirrus flinched. "There is only one way, but it is dangerous." Daniel frowned. "Dangerous how?" She hesitated. "There is an ancient ritual that can dissolve the bond, but it requires a great deal of power. And the enforcers, they will not allow it. They believe that once a bond is made, it must never be broken. Daniel sat back, crossing his arms. So basically, we either follow their rules or they come after you. Cirrus lowered her head. Yes. Daniel exhaled sharply. He had been in tough situations before, but this was something else. He wasn't a warrior. He was just an engineer, a problem solver. But right now, the problem wasn't machines or circuits. It was an entire alien culture that wanted to take Cirrus away, or worse. He wasn't about to let that happen. Cirrus glanced up at him. You are troubled. Daniel scoffed. Of course I'm troubled. I don't like the idea of people hunting someone down over some weird tradition. Cirrus studied him for a moment before speaking softly. You do not have to involve yourself. If you tell them you refuse, they will take me, and you will be left alone. Daniel looked at her, and something inside him twisted. There was no anger in her voice, no pleading, just quiet acceptance, like she had already accepted her fate. That only made him more determined. Not happening, he said firmly. Cirrus' eyes widened slightly. But why? Daniel shook his head. Because it's wrong. You didn't choose this bond, and neither did I. No one should be forced into something they don't want. A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time since she had clung to him, Cirrus' expression softened. You are strange for a human, she murmured. Daniel smirked. I get that a lot. Suddenly, a loud beeping noise filled the room. Daniel's heart jumped as he turned towards his communication panel. A red light blinked rapidly. Someone was trying to reach him. His stomach tightened. A bad feeling crept up his spine. Cirrus stood up instantly, her body tense. Who is it? Daniel pressed a button, and a robotic voice echoed through the room. Unidentified ship, DTTKTE, approaching Earth orbit. Daniel's eyes widened. That's not normal. Cirrus took a shaky breath. They are here. Daniel turned to her. The enforcers. She nodded, her face pale. They have come for me. Daniel's heart pounded. This was happening too fast. They barely had time to figure things out, and now the enforcers were already here. The comm panel beeped again, and a deep booming voice filled the room. Human, we request an audience. Hand over the marked one. Daniel clenched his fists. He had expected them to come eventually, but not this soon. Cirrus gripped her cloak tightly. If I go, they will take me away. I will never be free again. Daniel looked at her, then at the blinking comm panel. He had a choice to make. He could hand her over, let them take her. He would be safe. Or he could fight back. His gut told him there was only one real option. Daniel turned to Cirrus. I hope you're ready to run, because we're not giving up that easily. Cirrus' breath hitched. You would fight for me. Daniel smirked. Let's just say, I don't like being pushed around. Outside, the distant hum of an alien ship's engines filled the night sky. The enforcers had arrived, and Daniel wasn't planning to surrender. Daniel's heart pounded as the alien voice echoed through the room. Human, hand over the marked one. Refusal will be seen as an act of defiance. He turned to Cirrus, who stood frozen, her silver eyes filled with fear. She had expected this, but not so soon. Daniel took a deep breath. All right, we need to move. Now. Cirrus hesitated. But where will we go? Daniel grabbed his jacket and slung it over his shoulders. I have a friend. He owes me a favor. He can hide us. Cirrus blinked in surprise. You would truly do this for me? Daniel didn't even pause. I'm not about to let some space thugs take you just because of some ancient rule. The comm panel beeped again, more urgent this time. You have 60 seconds to comply. Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed Cirrus' hand and pulled her towards the door. The night outside was quiet, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. Somewhere above them, a massive alien ship hovered in orbit, watching, scanning, waiting. They needed to disappear. Daniel led Cirrus through the back alleys of the city, keeping his head low. His contact, Jared, was a former smuggler who now ran a repair shop. If anyone could hide them, it was him. Cirrus glanced up at the sky, her hands tightening around her cloak. They will track me. The bond. It connects us. Daniel frowned. Then we break it. She shook her head. The ritual takes time. We must be safe first. Daniel sighed. Then let's make sure they don't catch us before that. They reached Jared's shop 10 minutes later. The lights were dim, and the metal shutters were halfway closed. Daniel knocked twice, then paused, then knocked 3 more times. A small camera whirred, scanning them. Then the door slid open. Jared stood there, arms crossed, his expression half annoyed, half curious. Daniel, what the hell did you do this time? Daniel pushed Cirrus inside. I'll explain later. We need a place to lay low. Jared's eyes flicked to Cirrus, and his expression shifted from annoyance to concern. That's a Xelari. Daniel nodded. Yeah, and her people want her back. Jared whistled. You sure know how to pick your fights. Cirrus lowered her head. I did not wish to bring trouble. Jared shook his head. Not your fault, lady. But if the Xelari enforcers are after you, you don't have much time. He turned to Daniel. Follow me. Jared led them into the back room, where old ship parts and broken machinery were stacked against the walls. He moved a crate, revealing a hatch. Basement's shielded. No scanners can pick up life signs down there, he said. Daniel nodded and motioned for Cirrus to go first. She hesitated, looking at him. You trust him? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded. With my life. Cirrus exhaled and climbed down. Daniel followed, and Jared sealed the hatch behind them. The basement was small but secure. A single cot, a table, and a monitor screen flickering with old data. Jared leaned against the wall. All right. Now tell me, what's really going on? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. It's complicated. Jared snorted. Clearly. Cirrus stepped forward. I am bonded, but I did not choose it. Now my people wish to take me back by force. Jared's face darkened. A forced bond. That's bad news. Daniel nodded. Yeah, and we need to break it before they find us. Jared rubbed his chin. There's a guy. Old scientist. Used to work on alien tech. If anyone knows how to break that bond, it's him. Cirrus' eyes lit up with hope. Where is he? Jared frowned. Problem is, he's off-world. You'll need a ship. Daniel sighed. Of course we do. Jared smirked. Lucky for you, I might know where to get one. Meanwhile, above the city, the Xelari enforcer ship loomed in orbit. Inside, a tall alien warrior, clad in black armor, watched the screens. The human had not surrendered the marked one. The enforcer's yellow eyes narrowed. Prepare the hunting drones, he ordered. The chase had begun. The basement was quiet, but Daniel felt the weight of time pressing down on them. Above them, the Xelari enforcers were searching. He knew they had to move soon. Jared leaned against the table, arms crossed. So, you need a ship. Daniel nodded. Yeah, and fast. Jared scratched his chin. I know a guy. He runs cargo between Earth and the outer colonies. No questions asked, if the price is right. Cirrus shifted nervously. Will he help us? Jared smirked. If you've got something to trade, sure. Daniel sighed. He wasn't exactly rich, and Cirrus had nothing except the clothes she wore. We'll figure it out. Just get us to him. Jared nodded. All right, but we have a problem. Daniel exhaled. Of course we do. Jared pointed to the monitor. A live security feed from the upper streets showed black armored figures moving in groups, scanning every alley and doorway. The Xelari aren't playing around, Jared said. They've deployed ground troops. Cirrus' hands trembled slightly. They will not stop. They have my signal. Daniel frowned. Your signal? Cirrus looked away. The bond. It connects me to them. They can track me anywhere. Jared whistled. That explains why they found you so fast. Daniel clenched his fists. Can you turn it off? Cirrus shook her head. Not yet. The ritual takes time. Jared groaned. Well, that's just great. Guess we'll have to do this the hard way. The night was cold as they stepped out into the narrow alley behind the repair shop. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows over the crumbling walls. Jared led the way, keeping close to the walls. We need to stay off the main roads. My guy's hangar is on the west side of the city. Cirrus pulled her hood lower, hiding her glowing silver eyes. Daniel walked beside her, one hand near his concealed pistol. They moved quickly, slipping through dark alleys, avoiding security drones and patrols. But the Xilari were relentless. As they crossed an empty street, a deep humming sound filled the air. Daniel's gut twisted. Hunting drones, Jared whispered. A small black metal sphere hovered above them, scanning the street with red lights. Cirrus tensed. It senses me. Daniel acted fast. He grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground and threw it with all his strength. The pipe smashed into the drone, sending it crashing against a wall. Sparks flew as the machine collapsed, its sensors flickering. Jared whistled. Nice throw. But the damage was done. A sharp alarm blared through the streets. They know we're here, Cirrus whispered. Daniel grabbed her hand. Then we run. They sprinted through the back streets, weaving between abandoned buildings and closed market stalls. Behind them, heavy boots stomped against the pavement. The Xilari were closing in. Jared motioned toward an old sewer tunnel. Down there. It leads to the hangar district. Daniel hesitated. The tunnel was dark, damp, and smelled awful. But there was no choice. One by one, they climbed down into the narrow underground passage. The tunnel stretched for miles beneath the city, filled with rusted pipes and stagnant water. Jared checked his wrist device. We're close, just a few more blocks. But then, Cirrus gasped. They're here. Metal footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. Daniel turned and saw dark figures emerging from the shadows, their yellow eyes glowing. The Xilari had followed them underground. Jared cursed. They're faster than I thought. Daniel pulled out his pistol. We hold them off. Keep moving. Cirrus hesitated. I can't leave you. Daniel grabbed her shoulders. Get to that ship. Break the bond. That's how you win. Cirrus' eyes burned with emotion, but she nodded. I will not waste this chance. Jared and Cirrus rushed ahead while Daniel turned back. The Xilari warriors advanced, their armored bodies reflecting the dim light of the tunnel. One of them lunged. Daniel fired. The shot slammed into its shoulder, but the alien barely flinched. Daniel cursed and dodged as a blade slashed past his face, cutting into the wall beside him. Too many. Too fast. Just as one warrior raised his weapon, a sudden explosion rocked the tunnel. Jared had rigged a pipe bomb. The blast sent the aliens flying, buying them a few precious seconds. Jared grinned. Time to go. Daniel didn't argue. He ran, following Cirrus through the final stretch of the tunnel. At the end of the passage, a metal ladder led up to a grimy airlock door. Jared punched in a code, and the door slid open. A massive cargo ship sat in the dimly lit hangar, its engines already warming up. The pilot, a tough-looking woman with cybernetic eyes, waved at them from the ramp. You got my payment. Jared tossed her a bag of stolen credits. You get us out of here, and it's yours. The pilot smirked. Get on board. Cirrus turned to Daniel. You made this possible. Daniel shook his head. We're not safe yet. The sound of marching boots filled the hangar. The Xilari were coming. The engines roared. The countdown began. They had seconds to escape. The cargo ship's engines roared as the hangar filled with flashing red lights. Sirens blared. The auxiliary soldiers were closing in fast. Daniel stood on the loading ramp, gripping his pistol. Jared was beside him, rifle raised. Saris hesitated, her silver eyes scanning the hangar. "We have to go," Daniel shouted. The pilot, a tough-looking woman named Mara, growled from the cockpit. "I can't lift off until that blast door opens. Somebody's gotta hack it." Jared cursed. "Figures. Nothing's ever easy." Saris took a deep breath. "I can do it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "They trained me in technology, but they never thought I'd use it against them." "Then go," Daniel urged. Saris sprinted to the control panel, fingers flying over the screen. A deep mechanical hum filled the air as the ship's engines heated up. Then, boom! The hangar doors blasted open as Scifi warriors poured in, their rifles glowing with deadly energy. "Here they come," Jared yelled. Daniel fired first, his shot sparking against the metal walls as the auxiliary took cover. Jared followed, sending a hail of bullets toward the advancing soldiers. The auxiliary fired back, their weapons sending blue energy bolts across the hangar. Sparks flew as the blasts hit the ship's hull. Daniel ducked behind a cargo crate. "Saris, we need that door open now." Saris gritted her teeth, her hands glowing faintly as she hacked into the auxiliary security system. The main blast doors trembled. The control panel flashed red. "Almost there," she called. Jared tossed a grenade-like device at the incoming auxiliary. It detonated, sending them scattering. The explosion gave them a few seconds of breathing room. Daniel turned back to Saris. Now would be a great time. With a final keystroke, Saris gasped. "Got it." The massive blast doors began to open, revealing the dark sky beyond. Wind rushed into the hangar. Mara's voice crackled through the speakers. "Get in. We're taking off." Jared sprinted up the ramp first, covering Daniel and Saris as they followed. Saris stumbled, but Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her inside. As soon as they were in, Mara punched the thrusters. The ship lifted off, its engines roaring. The auxiliary warriors fired after them, but it was too late. The ship shot out into the sky, leaving the city behind. Inside the ship, the tension didn't ease. Saris sat on a metal bench, breathing hard. Daniel sat beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for everything." Daniel smirked. "We're not safe yet." Jared leaned against the wall. "Yeah, the auxiliary don't give up that easy. They'll send ships after us." Mara's voice crackled through the intercom. "You bet they will. We need to get off this planet's radar before they track us." Saris took a deep breath. "There's a way, but it's dangerous." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I'm starting to think dangerous is our only option." Saris hesitated. "I can break the bond." Daniel stiffened. Saris' voice was softer now. "If I break it, they won't be able to track me anymore. But the process is painful." Jared frowned. "Painful how?" Saris looked down. "The bond is part of my mind, my body. It was meant to connect me to the auxiliary forever. Cutting it will feel like tearing part of myself away." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Are you sure you can do it?" Saris gave a weak smile. "I have to." Mara's voice came again. "You've got about 10 minutes before they send fighters after us. Make it quick." Saris closed her eyes. She placed her hands together, her silver eyes glowing faintly. A faint hum filled the air. Daniel watched as her whole body tensed. Her breath became shaky, her fingers curled into fists. Then, she gasped in pain. Daniel's heart pounded. "Saris." Her body trembled violently. A blue glow pulsed around her. Sweat dripped from her forehead. Then suddenly, the glow shattered like broken glass. Saris collapsed, breathing heavily. Daniel caught her before she hit the floor. Jared stared. "Did it work?" Saris' voice was weak but steady. "Yes. They can't find me now." Mara's voice crackled through the speakers. You might want to hold off on celebrating. We've got company. Daniel helped Cirrus up. What now? Jared looked at the cockpit screen. Stellari fighters. 3 of them. They must have locked onto our launch signature before the bond broke. Mara cursed. I can't outrun them. Cirrus steadied herself. Then we have to fight. Daniel clenched his fists. Guess we're not done yet. Alarms blared inside the cargo ship as Mara cursed from the cockpit. The auxiliary fighter ships were closing in fast, their sleek black bodies cutting through space like deadly arrows. Daniel gripped the side of his seat, feeling the ship shudder as energy blasts exploded around them. We can't outrun them, Mara shouted. They're faster and armed to the teeth. Jared loaded his rifle. Then we fight. Cirrus stood, still weak from breaking the bond, but her silver eyes burned with determination. I can help. Daniel turned to her. How? She took a deep breath. I still have access to their systems. If I can get a signal through, I might be able to shut down their targeting for a few seconds. A few seconds? Jared scoffed. That's not much. It's enough, Mara said, flipping switches. If you give me even 3 seconds, I can pull a maneuver that'll put us behind them. Daniel looked at Cirrus. Can you do it? She nodded. I have to. She ran to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. She closed her eyes, reaching out with what little connection remained. The fighters loomed closer, their weapons glowing. Boom! The ship rocked as a blast scraped their hull. Sparks flew from the ceiling. Hurry! Cirrus! Daniel shouted. Her hands trembled as she hacked into the auxiliary system. One fighter locked onto them. The targeting alarm blared. Then, Cirrus gasped as a surge of energy pulsed through her. The targeting system of the fighters flickered. They're blind, she gasped. Mara didn't hesitate. She yanked the controls, spinning the ship into a tight roll. The sudden maneuver sent them behind the fighters. Got him, Mara growled. She slammed the trigger. Boom. A missile shot forward, striking the lead auxiliary fighter. It exploded into a bright fireball. The remaining 2 fighters struggled to regain control. Jared took the turret controls and opened fire. His shots tore through the second fighter's wing, sending it spiraling out of control. Daniel saw the last fighter turn to flee. Mara smirked. Oh no, you don't. She hit the boosters, and the ship shot forward. The final fighter tried to escape, but Mara's aim was perfect. Boom! The last auxiliary ship vanished in flames. For a moment, there was silence. Then Mara let out a breath. We're clear. Cirrus collapsed into his seat, exhausted. Daniel sat beside her. You okay? He asked. She nodded, a tired smile on her lips. I am now. Jared leaned against the wall. So, where do we go now? Mara glanced at the navigation screen. There's a neutral colony about a day from here. If we lay low, the auxiliary won't be able to track us. Cirrus hesitated. They won't stop hunting me. Daniel placed a hand on hers. Then we'll just have to keep running. She looked at him, surprised. You'd really stay with me? He smiled. Of course. You don't have to do this alone. Cirrus' eyes shimmered. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a tool of the auxiliary empire. She was free. And she wasn't alone. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Daniel sat back and watched the stars streak by. Their fight wasn't over. But for the first time, he believed they had a chance. The end.